All right, this is the third final video right here on this lesson. First step is to do what? Divide by 7. And you could have moved the 56 first if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter. You will have t squared plus 4t. I hate t's because they start looking like plus signs. Plus 8 equals 0. Okay, so I also need to, in addition to making sure that the a value is 1, I also need to move that 8, make space for my new perfect c value that I want to come up with. So I want to subtract 8. So I will have t squared plus 4t space equals -8, and I'm also going to put a space on that side. That way it'll help me remember that what I do to one side I do to the other. So I need my new perfect c value, and I find that new perfect c value by looking at b, taking half of it, and then squaring it. So what's half of 4? It's 2. 2 squared takes you back to a positive 4. Put a plus 4 on both sides to maintain the equality of this equation. So on the left side, again, I got that perfect c value so I could factor, but instead of this step, I'm going to skip straight to my binomial squared part. T, and how do you get this next piece? Half of this, half of b. So it's just going to be positive 2 equals -4. That's right. So let's solve this thing by square rooting and square rooting. I'll have t plus 2 equals what? Plus or minus 2i. That's great. You guys remember that from a couple of weeks ago. All right, so final step would be to do what? Subtract 2. Subtract 2. Final answer is t equals -2 plus or minus 2i. Yeah, remember, complex numbers always have the real part first and the imaginary part second. Okay, so that's your answer. How about you guys try, if you're watching this at home, maybe you want to pause it and try this one by yourself and then unpause it. I want to pause it right now. You guys try this one, and then we'll go over it. First thing to do is to make space for your new c value. The a value is already 1, so let's make some space for the new c value. We're going to have x squared plus 6x blank spot equals 3 with the blank spot over here also. And then I want to look at my b value, which is positive 6. And then I'm going to divide that by 2 and then square it. Half of 6 is 3, and then 3 squared is positive 9. So I need to add it to both sides to maintain the balance. Now the whole purpose of getting that perfect c value is to be able to write it as a binomial squared. And over here we're going to have 12. So the binomial squared, we're talking about x's here, so I want to put an x in there. Now for this number that belongs in here, all I need to do is look at the b value, which is 6, and half of that will go in here. Okay? You might even want to do some notes, like this is the setup, x, and then the b over 2 is what belongs in there, right? So half of 6 is 3, so plus 3 is in there. So maybe you don't want to do these notes right here. So let's square root both sides now. You're going to have x plus 3 equals the square root of 12, but with the plus minus in front of it. And your final step will be to, actually not your final step, let's subtract 3. There's still more to it. You're going to have x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 12. Now, if you have a number inside the root that could be broken down to get a perfect square number, you have to do that. So on the side, the square root of 12, I'm going to rewrite it not as 2 times 6, but I'm going to rewrite it as 4 times 3, because 4 is a perfect square number. And when you do the square root of 4, you get a nice, beautiful answer 2, and the square root of 3 simply comes down. So the fact is that the square root of 12 is really 2 square root of 3. So my final answer, if I go back to my answer over here, it'll be x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. Ta-da!
Why didn't we do that on number 28?
Why did we not do that?
Yeah, like we just left it like the square root of 10.
Oh yeah, because the square root of 10 can't be broken down. So okay, so let me just go to the side right here, a little mini lesson. The square root of 10, could you break it down to get a perfect square number?
No.
No, I mean 2 and 5, neither of those are perfect square numbers, so that doesn't help you at all, right? So, but if you have the square root of 20, then yeah, you could break it down to 4 and 5. That way you could split it and you get 2 square root of 5, right? So if you could actually get a perfect square number, that's when you split them. If you can't, like if I say what's the square root of 22, and I tell you simplify it, well, the square root of 22 is exactly that, the square root of 22. I mean, 2 times 11, that doesn't help anybody. So you just leave it like that. Okay, so let me, since we already finished, what question?
Yeah. Why didn't you add it to the 2, the negative 3 plus
So the question is, why did I not add, what?
2 on that?
Right here?
You add the 3, negative 3 and 2.
Negative 3 and 2. Now remember, this is 2. This is like, it belongs to the square root of 3, right? So this is like saying 2x, right? But instead of x's, you have square roots of 3. So you can't add negative 3 and 2x. You just leave them separate. Since we finished a little early, let's go back to this over here. And check this out. Looking at x squared plus bx plus blank spot, what would be our perfect c value right here?
What?
Going back to this, what would be our perfect c value right here? Oh, what is our perfect c? Where do we get our perfect c from? Half of b, so let me go b over 2. And then what do I do with that b over 2? I square it. Yeah? So this is what I want you to do. I want you to think algebraically without numbers. I want you to think with the letters. So this is a perfect square quadratic trinomial. Yes? Which means I will be able to write it as a binomial times a binomial, which ultimately means that I'll be able to write it as a binomial squared. Agreed?
Yeah.
Now, that binomial squared is going to have an x right here, and what will be the value in here?
Half of B.
Half of b, and what's half of b? Here's b. Half of b will simply be half of b, which is b divided by 2. Okay? So, I think now, looking at this situation, it makes more sense than when we first talked about it over here, up on top. Right, this is where I said I made a mistake, the plus or minus. It should technically just be plus, not a minus right there. And yes, it could be negative. But see, I think it makes more sense by looking at it the way we did over here. Cool?
Yeah.
Cool. Done.